All you lovers, this is your time.
This is Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby, and you're listening to the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast.
Talking about freedom. Let yourself be free.
My guest today on this episode of the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast is Dr. Aziz Gazipura. Dr. Aziz has a background in clinical psychology, but he's a real expert in confidence. And he's here to talk with us today about why self-confidence is important and how you can be more confident. He's dropping all kinds of new ideas and actionable tips, so be ready to be inspired, and you might also want to be taking some notes because this is really good stuff. So let's dive right in with Dr. Aziz.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Bobby.
So the question we have for you, Dr. Aziz, is obviously how to be more confident. But before we even go there, can you talk a little bit about why? I mean, why is confidence so important? We hear all the time from every direction that we should be more self-confident, we should have higher self-esteem. And, for people that struggle with this, that quickly turns into just one more thing that makes them feel badly about themselves. Like, oh God, now I'm not confident enough. So what's the impact of confidence, on a life, on relationships, on a career? Why does confidence matter?
I do think that's ironic, right? Someone's feeling maybe a little bit low about themselves or anxious, and then they have this idea, I should be more confident. Ugh, I'm not. And then they feel worse. So I'm so glad we're having this conversation. So we can start by clearing that one up so people can feel more free.
Well, let's just start right there because it's true. I mean, I think people that struggle with self-confidence, which is, okay, hi, everyone, right? But, doubts themselves from time to time. Like there's always this giant list of things that we all need to be, we all need to do. And, now we have 75 self-anointed life coaches in our Instagram feed every day, jumping up and down, telling us that we should like ourselves more and be more confident. And it's just like, oh, okay, great. Why? Why is that even important?
Sure. Well, from a subjectively, our own experience is, I like to think of it as a relationship. And, if you're imagining having a relationship with a friend or a family member or a spouse, and what is the quality of that relationship? Are you connected or are you distant? Are you loving and kind and patient, or are you impatient and frustrated and critical? And there's really no difference with the relationship with ourselves. We are either distant and disconnected and kind of zoned out and not really present with ourselves, or we can be harsh, critical, impatient, judging, angry. And when we live that way, whether it's a relationship with someone in your life or a relationship with yourself, when you're living that way, it's painful. And it can be limiting. Feeling bad aside, it also can be very restricting and limiting to your life, because when you're feeling low about yourself, you're feeling like you are unworthy or unlovable, you're not going to take risks. You're not going to put yourself out there. You're not going to really live up to, what you want to do and what you want to create in life. So I think it has a kind of a 1-2 punch effect on us when our confidence and self-esteem is low.
Yeah. I am so glad we're talking about this way and in this language, because I think you said something just so insightful, which is really like that self-confidence, right? To be self-confident, to be in this almost mood state of self-confidence. It's like people think that means that they need to feel a certain way. They need to project themselves differently to others. It's almost like how they should be out in the world is air quote self-confident. But I love the way that you're talking about this in terms that I think is much easier to understand and like more relatable, which is that let's just toss that self-confidence term out the window almost. What we're really talking about is the quality of the relationship that you have with yourself. Is it supportive? Is it patient? Is it kind? Or are you being mean to yourself, harsh with yourself, beating yourself up, tearing yourself down? How does your relationship with yourself contribute to how you feel in relationships with others?
I mean, it is the most important thing in a lot of ways because
Mhm.
everyone can just use this as a little thought experiment. Imagine you're spending a day with someone that you love. Maybe it's a lover or a close friend or your spouse of 15 years. You guys got a little date time away from the kids and you're out in a beautiful park or near a waterfall or going to the movies or whatever you love to do with someone that you love. And I say, well, great. How are you feeling? What's that day like? And if you say, well, inside my head, I'm judging myself. I don't think I look very good. My clothes don't fit well. I'm boring. I'm worried about what's going to happen next because I'm not good enough. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It doesn't matter who you're with. It's pain. It's suffering. And so if we don't get a handle on that, if we don't learn how to work with that, those voices in our head, the critical side of us, our insecure parts, if they run the show, if it dominates us, then we're going to suffer. And of course, our relationships are going to suffer too, right? Because we're not coming out as our best or most free self. We're going to be a lot more restricted, a lot more guarded, a lot more inhibited. So
Yeah.
it makes all the difference. And I do think that thinking of it that way as a relationship with yourself, I often say confidence is an inside job
Mhm.
because if people confuse that persona, that bravado, that
Yeah.
appearance of confidence, the people that like really puff that up actually, and you probably know this from your work and everything, it's like the inverse. Inside, they're the most insecure. It's a compensation. And
Yeah.
so we want to step away from needing to look confident, but be anxious inside and actually say, okay, how do we fundamentally approach ourselves and life so that we can truly feel more relaxed, more accepted, more acceptable, and then more courageous to move
Mhm.
forward and really connect with others in a deeper way.
Yeah. I love that. And, just to hear you talk, like you speak about this so insightfully and so compassionately. And I hope that this is okay to ask about just, in looking through your materials. You mentioned that at an earlier point in your own life, it sounds like you struggled to have a good relationship with yourself. And I can only imagine the amount of empathy and just genuine understanding that must have come from that experience. Is it okay to ask you about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that is the source of not only my empathy for this and understanding, but also my endless hunger to serve in this way,
Mm,
because I experienced firsthand for many years what it was like to live with pretty severe social anxiety and all of its cousins that people might not notice, but excessive niceness, people pleasing, excessive guilt, worrying constantly what other people think of me. So even after I got past some pretty strong inhibition and avoidance and kind of broke through to the next level of at least appearing a little bit more confident, I was really tormented and suffered a
mm,
lot with this relationship with myself. So what that led to was this endless obsessive hunger to say, well, how do I liberate myself from
yeah.
this? And I was in therapy and I'd go to workshops and I go to trainings and I would always be listening specifically for, but how do I like myself? How do I stop this critical beast in my head that seems like I'm not in control of it? And so, over time, fortunately, with enough growth and exploration, I was able to really discover how to shift that. And we could talk more about that in this interview. But the beautiful thing is, I say confidence is an inside job and we need other people. It's this
Mm,
beautiful synergy where I didn't really fully free myself. I mean, look, of course, we all have self criticism. We all have some self doubts. I'm not saying that that's gone forever, but I mean, it's night and day different the way I live, my relationship with myself now. And it's not where it is today because I just did it all myself. It's truly other people. It's listening to shows like this, it's reading books, it's doing the work. And as we do that, and as we take the risk to be more real and more vulnerable, as we change the way we talk to ourselves, the way we treat ourselves, you can experience a fundamental shift. And the way that I encapsulate this with people that I work with now is I call it being on my own side. And
mm.
in fact, the people that I work with, the groups that I run, it kind of they came up with its own acronym, OMOS, on my own side, OMOS. And so that's a
Nice.
common phrase people will talk about is how to be more on my own side. Because when we're on our sides, another way of saying what we're talking about here. And so, yes, I made a shift in my life from being many years very not on my own side, very against myself, to fundamentally residing where my center of gravity now is on my own side.
Yeah. And I'm glad too that you bring up the part about how hard it is to do on their own, because it's almost like you're lost in this forest almost with this person who's mean to you and like telling you all these terrible things about yourself.
Mm.
And I think that when you are alone in that, it's very easy to get tricked into believing that that mean voice is true. And I think it requires a connection with somebody else, at least in the beginning stages of this journey, to say no, don't listen to them. That is not true. Let me show you how to think differently or what to do to talk back to that inner voice. And it's very difficult to do that without someone almost like coming in to get you. And I want to say that out loud because, again, I think a lot of times people believe that they should be able to do these things on their own or like, read a blog article or listen to a podcast and be like, okay, I know what I should do now. I just want to say that it's very hard to do this. It's one thing to hear what you should do or what helps, but the doing of it is a collective endeavor, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the whole purpose of this inner critic, that's something I became
Mm.
very fascinated by. Like, what's going on? This seems so like, maladaptive. This seems so not
Mm.
not healthy. Like, what's going on? And what I discovered over time is, and I love this idea of being in the woods, being in the forest, and you got this character next to you that's criticizing you.
Yeah.
But it actually, as sort of purposeless as it might seem, just mean, or it actually has a very specific function.
Mm.
And the way I guide clients to see this, I said, well, what if that voice were true? And it's you're ugly and you're not smart enough and you're not going to succeed and all these things. Like if we were just to say, okay, it's taken at face value, it's all true. Where is it steering you towards in your life?
Mm.
And when people reflect on this, what they often find is it is guiding them to downsize their life, to avoid risk, avoid stepping into the unknown, avoid trying new things, avoid connecting, avoid being vulnerable, and really kind of keep life as contained, armored, and small as possible.
Mm. It's
And so
protective.
it's a protective voice. Absolutely. It's an outdated protective strategy to survive through basically armoring and avoiding life. And what's very helpful to see that because once you start to know that, it's actually a first step because all of a sudden, imagine you've had this character with you for years in the woods and you think, maybe you think, oh, it's a jerk, but you also think it's looking out for you. It's giving
Mhm.
you real information. Maybe it's even a friend
It's
or
the truth.
it's the
Yeah.
truth. And all of a sudden people start to say, wait a minute, wait a minute. And I'll often tell them like I call it the safety police. It's trying to keep you safe by, corralling you. And I'll
Mm.
say that your safety police is not the voice of truth. It's a propaganda campaign to keep you in the woods, to keep you out of your life. And this brings us to other people because the safety police will love to say, first of all, you're screwed. Sorry, you're over. It's your genes, it's your family, it's your history, it's your age, it's your appearance, it's whatever. Don't even try. And by the way, don't tell anybody about this because you're so messed up. If people knew how messed up you were, they certainly wouldn't love you. So you got to work this out on your own. Just go read a blog article, listen to a thing, don't tell anybody. And honestly, that's doomed to fail. We can get a little bit of insight. We can get a little bit of growth. I'm a big believer in education. That's why, you have this podcast. I do my own. And to really transform this in a fundamental way, we got to involve other people.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be necessarily, it could be paid help or counseling or groups. It could also just be like, okay, I'm going to read this book, but I'm going to talk about it with my friend. I'm going to talk
Mhm.
about it to my spouse. And there's so many people I come across who come into my world who want to do coaching or other things. And they're like, I can't tell my spouse. I'm like, okay. I meet them where they're at and I make a note. I'm like, that's a problem. Because if you have so much shame about the anxiety that you can't even tell the person ostensibly that you're closest with, that's a red flag that we want to make sure that we address. So over time, you can because you're afraid right now, but that's going to be the biggest source of healing and liberation to
Mm.
bring other people into your world. And your safety police who's in the woods with you is going to yell till it's blue in the face saying, don't let anyone in. Don't let anyone. It's too dangerous.
Mm. Yeah. To be able to have a corrective emotional experience where you are emotionally intimate and vulnerable with someone who does love you and who is able to
Mm.
receive that in a healing kind of way is so transformational. And I just also want to say out loud for the benefit of people listening to this who might not be in that situation is that it does also require an emotionally safe relationship that I see,
Mm.
that not everyone and not every relationship is ready for that kind of authenticity, as powerful as it is. And so, as a couples counselor, one of the things we have to do sometimes is as people sort of grow together, like pacing themselves on each side, because it can be very unhelpful, if even damaging, if people are like, okay, I'm ready to share and be vulnerable with you now with a partner who is angry with them or not ready to receive them in that way. And so there can be, I think, some couples work that needs to happen in order for it to be a good experience and not another bad experience that supports that, to use your phrase,
Yes.
the safety police who's then like, I'm never doing that again. And I think that that's what can be really confusing for people sometimes. And okay, so let's talk about this. One of the reasons that I wanted to speak with you is that in addition to your work around like confidence and coaching, you have a background in clinical psychology and you've done a lot of researching and writing on the subject of social anxiety, which is it's in the DSM and it is sort of in that more disordered realm. And I'm curious to know how you would characterize serious for real social anxiety as being different from a confidence problem. How would you articulate that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's really a matter of degree when it
Hmm.
comes to social anxiety. I think everyone experiences social anxiety. All that means is we feel fear of other humans. That's really what it means.
Mm-hmm.
And typically it's a fear of being judged, disliked, rejected, and that underneath that is the belief that we are unworthy, unlovable, and so that rejection means something damning about us.
Yeah.
Because if someone is like, oh, yeah, someone might not like me, but I know that I'm okay, or I know that I'm worthwhile, or I know that even if I'm not good at this thing, I'm still a worthy human, then that person's probably not going to experience much social anxiety. They might feel a
Hmm.
little bit of nervousness or something, but it's a different ball game. And so that
Yeah.
we need those are the sort of the fundamental agreements, not agreements, ingredients for social anxiety. And again, we all know that experience. Maybe it's at a party. Maybe it's with someone you find attractive. Maybe it's with a boss or a supervisor or an authority. Maybe it's in front of a group of people. I mean, people
Hmm.
don't call public speaking social anxiety when they're afraid to speak in front of a group, but that's what it is. It's I'm afraid of this group of people. And the more people, the more there's the potential judgment. And now I'm more scared. So I think it's pretty prevalent. It's very common.
Hmm.
So everyone's got it. It's just a matter of where and how often and how much does it come up for you. Now, most people, it comes up in certain areas and then they feel more relaxed when they're not in that environment. When it
Hmm.
starts to get into the more chronic or severe social anxiety, it follows you everywhere you go. And so you're nervous in a group of people, you're nervous on a date, or if it's severe enough, you might not even engage in these activities. You might not date, which is what I didn't. I didn't date for many years. I didn't speak up in groups. I wouldn't raise my hand. I wouldn't do all these things because the primary way that we deal with it when we're a lot of social anxiety is avoidance.
Hmm.
It's scary. It feels bad. So I'm going to avoid it. The problem with that is the way avoidance works is the more we avoid something, the harder it becomes to confront it because we
Yeah.
don't have experiences. We don't have evidence that we can handle it. All we see is it's dangerous. I avoided it. Glad I got out of that danger. Better avoid it again next time.
Hmm.
And to make things worse, the story is if I did speak up, if I did share, if I did ask that person out, whatever it is, it would go terribly wrong. And so by never testing it, we solidify these stories of lack or not enough or unlovability. And so when someone's got a long pattern of social anxiety, which the average person with social anxiety, a more severe case of it, will not seek any help for 10 years.
Oh, that's a
It's an
long
unfortunate
time.
statistic. And that was my case too. But what I love about social anxiety is it is such people think of it as like a solid thing, or this is who I am, this is my genes, and it is so different than that. It is so much a pattern.
Mm.
It is a specific pattern that we run. I like to think of it more as a verb than a noun. So I am doing social anxiety. And as long as I do these certain patterns, I will have social anxiety. And, someone who has more severe diagnosable social anxiety, it's like, oh, you've just done the patterns for longer and more environments. And it's completely changeable. It's completely resolvable. And that doesn't matter. I've worked with people who had social anxiety for 40 years. And I've worked with people where it just kind of started to get out of control maybe in the last year or two. And regardless, it can be changed as long as someone is willing to make a change in their patterns and be willing to step by step in a supported, I love that you brought that up, in a supported way, confront some of the things they're afraid of, be open to things possibly being different, and to bring it back to earlier, to start with transforming their relationship with themselves. Because I know there's a one-to-one correlation. If someone is a high level of social anxiety, they have a high level of inner criticism, a very toxic level of inner criticism that I've never seen anything other than that. So that's one of the first places we start.
Yeah. And it's so important too. And I'm glad that you brought up the thing that can happen with social anxiety. Well, and any kind of anxiety really is that anxiety always leads us to avoid, well, usually anxiety can lead to other things, but many times it leads to this avoidance. And really, I mean, at a fundamental level, the antidote to anxiety is to move into it and do reality testing and try to do things differently. And if you are not giving yourself the opportunity to have different experiences, both inside of yourself or with other people, what happens is that it enshrines anxiety, that anxiety almost gets more and more powerful and more true because it's never, and I say true with my little air quotes here, because it is never questioned, it's never tested. And it really requires a lot of courage and support to begin to examine it and to think, maybe the story in my head is not the whole truth. And maybe if I do start having a different kind of relationship with myself, treating myself differently, I can feel differently and have different experiences with other people. But it can be scary to start that process because, as you brought up so astutely, it feels like an existential threat to do so, that something terrible will happen. But I'm glad you're talking about it in this way.
Yeah, absolutely. And people think of it as like it's a brick wall or it's a solid thing, or maybe a cliff is a better metaphor, right? It's real. And I like to say it's, instead of it being a brick wall, it's actually more like a curtain or a cloud of vapor. You can walk right through it. And yet,
The
tell that
bubble
to someone.
curtain is what I call it. Yeah.
Right. I love that. And yet, you could tell someone that and they're like, I don't know. It looks like a wall to me. And that's why I love, love, love the power of groups. For years, I've been doing group work primarily because it's so inspiring for people to see other people just like them. Wait a minute, that person took a step in towards their fear. Maybe I can too. And so one of my favorite things is we would do them in person. I'm in Portland, Oregon. And right for this last year, we've been doing them all virtually. But we gather, a big group of people. I have a workshop coming up. There's probably maybe 150 of us there. And I teach things and help people experience a shift in the room or the virtual room, as it were. But then there's always an action step. And so we will go out, for a 30-minute break, and we're going to go do something. We're going to go test that edge right now. And so even if people are, alone in their city or whatever during a virtual event, they come back together and then we talk about it and we explore it. And so what people have is they have an immediate experience. It's no longer theoretical. Like, oh, I heard that in a book. Maybe I'll try it. It's like, I just did it. And here's what happened. And the way I see it is it's all positive. Either a lot of times people say, wow, I did this thing. And I mean, it was so much easier than I thought when I actually did it. And sometimes people are like, I did it and it was really uncomfortable. And then I'm still giving them a thumbs up. I'm like, great. And then sometimes people will say, I went out there and I tried and I was so in my head and I was judging myself and it felt awful and I failed. And I still give that a thumbs up because I say, if you've been avoiding something for years and you walk around or, I'm going to pick up the phone, no, I'm not. And you really wrestle with that edge of action, that already is a win.
Well, it
Because we
is.
think of it,
Yeah.
yeah, we think of it as like the action. It's only a win if I've leaped over. It's like, no, even just getting
No.
ready is a huge win. And we want to reinforce that. And if it is really painful and you're beating yourself up, great. Let's study that. Let's get really curious
Yeah.
because that's a piece of the social anxiety that you've been running. That's a piece of the pattern, piece of the recipe that's been going for 10, 20, 30, 50 years. And if you discover it right now and you see it, you can start to change it. And that's liberating.
It's so liberating. And I'm glad you are talking about that so like overtly with your group, because I think too, what can be very normal and expected, I think from my perspective and your perspective, but maybe not sometimes for the perspective of our clients, is that if you have been struggling with social anxiety or low self-esteem and avoiding people because of that, they're called social skills for a reason. Like there are actually skills involved with talking to people and making conversation and making eye contact, and if somebody does this I say that. And I think that people that have really been holding themselves apart from others, that they get rusty in some of those skills, and then when they do attempt to interact with other humans, they may be awash in judgment when they're doing it, but also because they're sort of rusty and they're like, oh, what do I do with my hands right now? Like that whole thing. But sometimes they do come across as being, rusty, and they have experiences with other people that make them think, oh, they hated me. I was terrible. That was horrible. And really kind of needing to reframe that is, no, this is why we practice, is to
Mhm.
test it out. And how did it go? And what were you telling yourself in that moment? And how did you feel? And how did they react? And really kind of like using it all as learning opportunities to kind of like relearn how to be with people. And I'm glad that you're offering people the opportunity to do that, because that can be very hard.
Yeah. Oh,
Mhm.
absolutely. And that's where it comes back to the we need other people, right? Because
Yeah.
I'll highlight this in anything I'm teaching where,
Hmm.
imagine someone picked up the guitar and they'd never played the guitar before. They played it maybe a handful of times, 5, 6 times in their whole life. And then they pick it up and they're like, I'm going to play this song. And they can't play the song very well. Would you say, well, I
Yeah.
guess you're the kind
Why
of
would
person
you?
who right. It's like, well, I guess you're the kind of person who'll never be good at the guitar. I mean, it's just not in the cards
Over.
for you. And
Yeah.
everyone kind of laughs because they see how absurd that is.
Hmm.
But I'll point out that's exactly what we do when we have a
Yeah.
couple of conversations. And what we need to do, and I use the guitar metaphor, is if someone wants to get better at the guitar, or my son, he's 7 years old right now, and he wants to learn how to play chess better.
Mm.
And yet he hates losing. And he hates losing so much, he even hates losing a piece. Like he was playing this morning with his brother and he lost his queen and he was in tears. He's like, this is terrible. I'm lost. And so what I'm trying to help him see is like, okay, you like to win. He's like, yeah, I like to win. I was like, okay, how do you think you win? He's like, well, I guess I have to play a lot. Yeah, that's right. You need to practice a lot. And
Mhm.
so if you're practicing, like, what does that mean to practice a lot though? And I'm unpacking that with him so he can see it means making moves when you're not sure if they're, good or not, getting feedback. Did I lose my
Mhm.
piece? And being willing to be messy, being willing to make mistakes, being willing to lose the pieces, being willing to lose games. And I'm trying to
Mhm.
help him see is that if he's willing to, fail forward faster, like the more he's willing to lose, the faster and the better he'll become.
Yeah.
And that's not just for chess. That's not just for the guitar. That's for social skills. That's for public speaking. That's for being engaging and funny with the group. That's for dating. I mean, that's for every way that
Yeah.
we can interact with people.
Well, that's so incredibly powerful and such an important reminder that that kind of growth mindset. And how do you stay in the ring when it is hard? And how do you identify with this idea of practicing is failing, is being uncomfortable, but that incrementally over time we get stronger and our skills build and we feel better. And I think, I mean, I don't know if this is true for you, but in my experience, the core of self confidence, yes, part of it is inner dialogue and your core self-belief, but it's like I think people who have had the experience of observing themselves doing hard things and like developing competence and not giving up, that turns into this confidence that just is this like very deeply felt, yes, I can. And it's because they have, that it's rooted in this experience. And to my ear, that is what you're describing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and if we think about confidence, the word actually comes from Latin.
Hmm.
Confides means with faith.
Yeah.
And so how do we have faith? And it makes me think there's a book by Sharon Salzberg about faith. She talks about bright faith versus verified faith
Hmm.
and how we need both in our lives. And bright faith is that, it's never been done before, or we've never done it before. And we feel it's possible.
Yeah.
We're called to it. We hope, we wish, it's a dream. And we have to have that because we got to step into the total unknown sometimes in our lives, and we got to do things we've never done before, or at least hopefully we are if we're growing and exploring. And ideally, bright faith gets turned into verified faith,
Mm.
which is exactly what I hear you talking about. Is like, I think it's possible for me to connect, more freely with others and be comfortable in my own skin and laugh and be more focused in the moment and the conversation than on myself. I mean, I think it's possible. That's the bright faith. But then once we've done it a number of times, and we have to be willing to take those risks, all of a sudden, yeah, you've done it 5, 10, 20, 30 times. And someone's like, hey, you want to come to me to this dinner party? You want to come to this thing, this mixer? You're like, yeah, okay. Because I know that you put me in a room full of people and I can interact.
Yeah.
I can do that. And that's that verified faith that only
Mm.
comes, it's only, we earn it, we
You
forge it,
earn
we
it.
build it.
Hmm. Yeah. Important takeaway. Thank you so much for describing all of that. That's wonderful. And I love the chess metaphor too, and with what your son is going through. And it's so funny that, like, we try, I'm a mom too, like trying to teach our children this idea of grit. And it's really so instrumental in so many aspects of life, particularly when it comes to personal growth. And so I'm really glad that you're talking about it in that way. And hey, another thing that I wanted to ask you about too. So we've been talking about the importance of confidence, and we've been talking about the social anxiety piece. But you also wrote another book called Not Nice, which is about the overlap, the intersection of, struggling with self confidence or being worried about other people and a tendency to like people please, overgive, feel guilty. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about how those things are related.
Yeah, absolutely. So I believe in a lot of ways that niceness, and I called it Not Nice. It's a bit of a controversial title. People might hear that and think I'm suggesting people be jerks or, cruel. And
Mm.
what I very quickly address, literally on like, aside from the copyright page and stuff, the first page of the book is a chart that says nice versus not nice. And it's got 2 columns, and it just really shows the distinction between what I mean by nice. And niceness, for the most part, when people are behaving nice, they're not actually, focused on kindness and generosity. They're focused on being polite. They're
Mm.
focused on not upsetting others. They're focusing on following the rules. They're focusing on getting approval. And it's really often coming from a place of fear rather than love and connection. And so that's how I'm using the word nice. And I say the opposite of nice is not to be a jerk. The opposite of nice is authenticity. It's to
Mm.
be real, it's to be boldly yourself. So you say what's true rather than what's quote nice. And yes, there's so much nuance to it. That's why that book is like 550 pages. And there's still
Mm.
more nuance that I couldn't get to about, but I tried to give a lot of examples of how do we really communicate in a way that's quote not nice that isn't just kicking down the door and telling everyone they're stupid. There's a
Yeah.
way to persevere, to with kindness or with tenacity keep bringing up a subject or have the conversation you've been avoiding. And like anything else, there's a skill to that. And if we don't do it, we're not going to be good at it right away. We're going to be messy, but we got to lean in.
Mhm.
Because what I discovered along the way is that this niceness that I'm talking about is just another form of social anxiety. It's like a more adaptive form. It's so instead of someone being really avoidant and I'm not going to talk to anybody and I'm just going to, live in my apartment and never go out, the nice manifestation of social anxiety is more functional. You have friends, you have family, you have relationships, you have work, you're much more engaged in life, but you're living a persona of the nice person.
Mm.
And the persona of the nice person, it's just a different cage. But you got to say yes most of the time. Because if you say no, that's mean. That hurts people's feelings. That's selfish. You got to be giving almost all the time because same thing. You want to be mean or selfish. You don't want to hurt people's feelings by saying anything too direct or too real. So even if you feel a way, or even if you have a perspective, you don't want to share that because that could upset them. And so what ends up happening is people are engaging with others, but they're not taking these risks. They're not talking about what they really want. They're not saying what they really want. They're not being who they really are. And it starts to deaden their experience of life and relationships. It starts to build up a frustration. It starts to build up chronic health problems. It starts to build up resentment inside because we're not able to take care of our needs really effectively. And the other person is walking all over me or taking advantage of me because we're lacking the boundaries and the assertiveness to be real, for people to really feel where we're at. We're actually being deceptive. We're hiding where we really are. And I mean that because, like the social anxiety side, then I lived with this excessive niceness for many years. And it was really detrimental to my relationships, particularly intimate relationships, because you can't be excessively nice and truly intimate at the same time. They're not the same thing. And that became such a common occurrence for myself. And then all the clients I saw this in, that I realized I had to write another book about that. And that book is guiding people on that journey from discovering niceness, discovering maybe its toxic effect in their life, and then a willingness to step courageously into being more boldly authentic in their lives.
Yeah. No, that word that you just used, that courageous word, is something that I often think about and talk about with clients. And I hear what you're saying, that it's the book is really about reconceptualizing being nice as really being almost afraid in some ways of relationships. And again, just sort of another manifestation of not wanting to rock the boat. But in doing so, it really hollows out that emotional intimacy at the core of a relationship. And I think it's so, not just easy, but like predictable for people who don't talk about how they're feeling and prioritize what they imagine to be the needs of others, and through that niceness, that they can become so resentful or feel like they're getting walked all over. But I tell you what, as a couples counselor, the person on the other side of that often has no idea that they are being experienced as, pushing boundaries or being insensitive or not loving, because their partner isn't talking about it. And it's very interesting, like the meaning that people on both sides of that equation can make, because somebody is becoming increasingly like hostile and withdrawn and resentful, and their partner is like, what is going on? Because it isn't getting discussed. And so it takes an enormous amount of courage to have those real authentic conversations. And it feels scary, but boy, without it, I think again, people feel like they're protecting their relationships by being nice, but it is exactly the opposite. They are like, the mental image that's coming up is like the air being released from a balloon, right? That over time, there's just nothing there. So I'm really glad that you're talking about that.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
that's a great metaphor about the balloon. It's just a shell. That's all that's left. Is all that's you're left with
Yeah,
is the structure of the relationship.
exactly.
No life, no
Yeah.
vitality, no energy or passion to it. And you're
Mutual
absolutely
owning
right.
of real estate. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Exactly. We're bound by our
Yeah.
things, by our stability. And that's, in a
Mhm.
way, that's really what the nice approach is. It's prioritizing too much stability, too much
Yeah.
certainty, and not willing to step into the unknown and the uncertainty. And that's what people do often in relationships. There's a lot of uncertainty in the beginning. Is this person going to like me? Are they going to call me back? I'm so excited. And then what we want to do is we want to capture that and make it certain and make it predictable and make it controlled. And that leads to structures that try to control it, but that also leads to a lot of our own behavioral patterns. I'm
Mm.
going to say this, but not that. And that's what I see often, especially if you do a lot of couples work, I'm sure you see this, that people have been afraid to be real with each other for the last
Mhm.
5 years because now they feel like there's, quote, too much at stake. And yet it's kind of like a slow bleed where, maybe you don't have any blowups, but you're losing in the long game. And people not knowing that, I really have seen that. In fact, I have a little metaphor I use in the book about boundaries and it's a little thought experiment to have the reader reflect on how expressive are you with your boundaries. And so I say, imagine you're in your backyard and your backyard is next to your neighbor's backyard and there's no fence in between. It's just the lawn goes across both. And you're sitting in your back porch and you see your neighbor gets out of his house and he starts to walk over towards you and he walks into your yard and says like, hey, how's it going? And as he walks towards you and he steps on some of the flowers you have in your garden. And then he goes over and you have your peach tree in the backyard, and he walks over and he looks at your peaches like, oh my gosh, your peaches look so great. And he grabs a peach, a juicy ripe one, and bites into it and keeps walking towards you and says, how you doing today? And I just say, what do you do? What do you do in this situation? What's happening? Are you angry about the flowers? Are you upset about the peach? Do you say anything about the flowers? Do you say anything about the peach? Do you feel like, oh, I don't know what to say, so I can't say anything? Do you mention it? And it's just a kind of silly thought experiment, but it highlights exactly what you're talking about with couples.
Mm-hmm.
But that person might be like, what? I'm just being friendly. I'm coming over to say hi. And they have no idea they stepped on the flowers. They have no idea you have an issue about the peaches because you never say anything. And if we really want to start to live with more freedom, we got to be able to say, hey, great to see you. And, I've been saving those peaches. If you want to have some, I can give you some, but please don't pick them without talking about it first. It's as simple as that, those little things. And sometimes if someone's been nice for too long, they don't even think it can be that simple. They think it's got to be this huge nuclear combustion of like, what you've always been doing the last 10 years is I hate this about you. And it's like, actually, it's better for it to be more of like a combustion engine than a nuclear bomb going off.
Mm-hmm.
Just little things that you say here and there throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month that might not even seem super confrontational. They're just simple statements, simple questions that can really get you back on track.
Totally. But again, I mean, going back to your original points about confidence, I could really see how that's so closely related because if you doubt yourself, if you feel like you shouldn't say that, if you shouldn't upset people and are working very hard to kind of like maintain relationships because you're pretty sure that people don't like you or whatever it is, it's so hard to talk about how you really feel. And so there's that understandable like tendency to withdraw, but that things build up to the point that when you finally do say something, it is World War III. And you're like screaming at the neighbor for eating a peach. And he's like, okay, back away slowly. And it actually does mess up the relationship. And so by stepping into that, air quote conflict, but that authenticity and talking about how you feel as you go, it's one of the most important things that any of us can do to maintain high quality relationships. That's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, just to bring it back to what I was mentioning the workshops earlier, it's the same thing. And I run a group program that's all about helping people become more, it's called total social freedom. And it's about how do we really break out of that lifelong pattern of avoidance and niceness and social anxiety and just be more free around others. And what we do is we systematically build, it's a 12-week program. And each week there's another layer that gets added. And I'm a big believer in the gradual exposure. And I don't know where it's in there, somewhere in the middle, week 6, 7, they have an assignment to say no 3 times that week. And the goal is like, instead of having the World War III, you just build the muscle by lifting us, like look for something small that you can say no to. What's something really small? And the same thing, a couple weeks later, we have them like, what's one conversation you could go have that would feel like it's leaning into that edge, but it's not the most intense conversation of your life. It's just, can you go talk to that person? And I find that if we give people that support to systematically do it, then they start to build that confidence of, oh, I can do this. It can go well. And ultimately, the goal that I have for people is not just an increase in their confidence, but is a change in their identity. So they start to say, oh, I am the kind of person who can have direct conversations.
Yeah.
I am real. I am authentic. I am direct. It becomes who they are because then they're going to behave that way more and more and more. And eventually it just becomes, that's their new reality.
Wow, that's really powerful stuff. And that experiential component where people are really actively doing that reality testing, like, okay, the voice in my head tells me this is going to happen. But when I actually did it, that happened. And that over time, with that support, are really accumulating this new sort of like encyclopedia of experiences that help them reconceptualize what's real, but most importantly, who they are through that. And that's really deeply transformational stuff. That's really great. And hey, I know that we don't have a ton of time left and wanting to wrap up. We have talked about the experiential aspect of building confidence and also the identity pieces, communication. Circling back around though, so you and I both know, I think from our psychology background, that the cognitions that people have around self-concept, around, how they think, going back to that idea of how to have a better relationship with yourself. A lot of it is learning or relearning how to talk to yourself and sort of shifting from one kind of inner narrative to a new, more helpful one. Are there any things that you've seen over your years of practice that are, some usual suspects that people who struggle with confidence usually have going on in terms of their inner narrative, and some shifts that you find yourself routinely encouraging people to make? Like I'm thinking of jumping to conclusions, or making assumptions about how other people feel. Or have you seen other things to be more impactful?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, some of the common ones are feeling a sense of certainty about knowing what someone's perception is, typically
Mm.
about you. Like
Mhm.
it's that might be called mind reading and cognitive therapy. I'll take it one step further. I call it projected dislike, where it's
Mm.
not just I know what they're thinking about me. I know they don't like me. And I just feel it when I walk into the room. And it feels very true. I'm certain of it. And I'll even look for evidence and I'll, confirm that and look for it or make it happen in some way. We
Mm.
often bring about those reactions to us because of, I think there's a lot going on non-verbally, energetically, emotionally. I think the more they study thought, it's really fascinating how much thought can be measured. So thought can be measured, as waves. If they put a device, EEG on your scalp, for example.
Mhm.
But there's also it's a squid. Have you heard of that one? The super quantum interference device, where
Are
they
you
can have
talking
this.
about particles behaving differently when people observe the experiment or not?
This one is actually, we could find it. It's, if you look it up online, just type in literally like squid reading thoughts or something. And it's
Okay.
like a device that's, measuring something in the quantum realm. I'm not going to even really understand the physics of it, but they can basically measure your thoughts from outside of your head. So
Hmm.
the idea is if we have enough refined instrumentation, they're already discovering and probably going to continue to discover that your thoughts are emanating out of you beyond the boundary of your skin, beyond your own
Mhm.
head. And it's the same thing with like, the energetic field of the human heart has been measured out like 10 feet or more than maybe it's 30 feet. I don't know. So this idea that we're like all self-contained is a sort of a outdated reality. And what's much more true is we're an interactive field with the space around us and the people around us. And so when we
Mm.
have these very like self-judgmental, self-critical, I'm not enough thoughts, we are actually bringing about more of that reaction to us.
Yeah.
And then it gets real murky because we're like, aha, I knew it, you see? And so we really want to intervene on that one, that jumping to the conclusion that people don't like me. And what I always help people with that one on is you think it's about them, it's about you and you not liking you. Or maybe more specifically, a part of you inside judges you.
Yeah.
So, what are you judging yourself for? That's one of the first things I always start with people. Like, what's your list? What's your, and I like to probably tell from my books and other things, I like to take stuff that's maybe more complex, or I don't like to use a lot of psychological jargon with people because I like to keep it very simple. So people can just
Mhm.
pick it up and run with it. And so I'll say, let's make a why I suck list. Like you have that, right? What is that for you? Because we have to start looking at what this grudge list that people have been holding against themselves for decades, ostensibly to make themselves better or to pressure themselves into growing or whatever weak story is there. But we gotta face that. We gotta start looking at that, and we need to bring in a lot of that on my own side work, that self compassion work.
Yeah.
And one of the ways I'll have them do that is to start to dialogue with that critical voice, to
Mhm.
and I have a book called On My Own Side, which guides people how to do this, where they can dialogue with that voice, start to find the fear and vulnerability underneath that part, and start to really get to the core of it, which is usually some sort of pain that's
Mhm.
underneath that hypercritical voice, and really meet themselves with a lot more love, a lot more patience, a lot more compassion, a lot more humanity. And
Mm.
then as they do that, it starts to melt away this chronic assumption that people are against me because you no longer are against you. And you can start to see a lot more clearly.
Yeah. Wow, powerful stuff. Man, just I feel like we could talk for 2 more hours about just all of these things that you brought up at the end about how we can really through our thoughts and expectations, almost create the experiences with other people that support our preconceived ideas, which are based on how we feel about ourselves, not actually how others feel, that it is a projection. And that by really understanding that wounded part of yourself and having a dialogue with it and getting to know it compassionately, that's a very powerful path of healing.
Yes, well said.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yes, good stuff. Gosh, well, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and perspectives on this important topic with us. Again, I feel like there's a lot more to talk about. So if you would ever like to come back and continue this conversation, the door is open.
I would love that. A part two.
Yeah, a part two. But in the meantime, I'm sure my listeners are very interested in everything that you had to say. And if any of you would like the opportunity to learn more about Dr. Aziz or his books or his courses or his groups or all other fun stuff he has going on. Oh, and there is also a podcast called Shrink for the Shy Guy podcast. You can find them all at draziz.com, draziz.com. Is there anywhere else that they should follow you? Are you on social media or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, the website will link to all those things,
Mhm.
but I'd say I'm probably most active on YouTube. We have
Nice.
usually 1 to 2 videos that come out each week where I'm teaching stuff for free. A lot of insights. Usually, what I'll do is I'll take, I run a lot of groups, so I'll take some of the key insights and teachings from the groups and then record videos that I think are going to help everyone based upon what we're doing in those. So that's a great way to get active, to get support. So yeah, the website is a great place to start. You can look me up on YouTube as well, or the podcast. But any place that you want to get plugged in, I mean, that's the why I'm doing this, is to reach people who think, oh, this is who I am. I've been this way for X years, and I guess that's it. And I guess the final message I would have is, like, you don't have to settle. The past doesn't equal the future, and in many ways, it's irrelevant how long you've struggled with something. If you're willing, you can make shifts really fast and not just manage it, but truly transform your experience of being around others, and to really start to experience a level of intimacy and connection with yourself, with others, that gives life depth and meaning and fulfillment. That's absolutely possible, and it's absolutely your birthright if you're willing to claim it.
Wonderful. What a beautiful note to land on. Thank you again so much for spending this time with me today. It's really been a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.